Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
Welcome, everybody, to a special edition here at the Alt Psych Show. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Kenneth Goodman, who, might I remind you, is the director of the Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy. He's the director of the Florida Bioethics Network. And I think you have superpowers too. Did I see that on your resume? Possibly superpowers. We're checking into it. Let's give everyone out there a warm round of applause for the good Dr. Kenneth. What was your name again? Goodman.
Sylvester. Kenneth Sylvester.
Nobody applauds for me. We are grateful to have you. We want to welcome you. I want to hear a little bit about what you do and why bioethics is important.
Well, so thank you for that, and thank you both for including me. This is a privilege and a treat as a Floridian who thinks that every once in a while something good happens. This is an opportunity to share some of that. So what we've discovered, I mean, the history of medical ethics, as you know, is ancient. But what we've discovered over the recent past is that anytime there's a new technology, there's going to be a legitimate question about whether it should be used, who should use it, under what circumstances it should be used. We see this, and we've seen it with some regularity with extraordinary technologies that can be used at the end of life. We're dealing with genetic technologies that were unimaginable in the year I was born, at least. For you know, perhaps that's different for you and other youthful folk. One of my subspecialties is information technology. There are computers now that do diagnoses more accurately than humans, raising the question about when you ought to be using one of them, which raises the very complicated and interesting issue that people are following with some urgency now, namely, do our artificial intelligence programs or machine learning algorithms do the job we want? Or are they too occult, too hard to explain, or perhaps even too biased to be used effectively? So it's technology, and the role of ethics and all of that is to say here are from a number of first principles are ways that we have found that our colleagues value advice that we might board out. So it could be in the ICU, it could be in the computer lab, it could be in the cancer ward, right? Here are the values that we share, and I think overwhelmingly, Dr. Sylvester, it's important to remember that overarchingly, I think we all tend to share pretty much the same values. I confess I am not a moral relativist. I believe that there are rights and wrongs, and they transcend our culture and our time. It's hard to identify them, and we're going to still disagree about some of them. But generally speaking, I think that most ordinary people share pretty much the same values. So the role of ethics in the statewide ethics network is to support our colleagues in education, in clinical care, and in research around the state.
So yes, you do have special powers, is what I heard you just say, which is why Dr. Schulman and I are thrilled to have your lens, your wisdom, your experience, and your training. And we're going to apply it to the bioethics of COVID today, because this is not something that I've heard talked about a lot, at least not in the South. There's some articles here and there, academic articles, but they are going to just scratch the surface of what we're going to talk about today. So we got 45 minutes. Here's a little bit of an outline before we get started. I like to think of myself as an observer from Mars, okay? I have not been living on planet Earth, and I have not been living during the pandemic. I am taking an autoscopic view of the way these humans have behaved. And, you know, because of that frame of reference, and to really flush out and illustrate the bioethics and what is bioethics and what does bioethics look like when we're talking about COVID and why it's so critically important in answering or addressing all of the controversies and conflicts and opinions that have gone on since the beginning of the pandemic. Our goal, therefore, is not to be opinionated or to take a stance. It's purely to focus on the bioethics and the debate of it. So, you know, an example might be something like, why are 40 to 60% of health workers refusing to vaccinate? Or we'll talk a little bit about the 4 cornerstones of medicine, the principles of medicine, which you are well versed in: the autonomy, beneficence, nonmaleficence, and justice. Now, justice has become critically important in this pandemic, and we can come back and talk about why as well. And using learning lessons from the past, I think we can, and along with the bioethic principles, we can apply this to this novel or new virus and the vaccine itself and what it does. So our overall agenda is to kind of just go through some observations, then maybe some general considerations that apply to bioethics, and then get a little bit more into the specifics, and then kind of finish up with some closing thoughts. So that's our general outline. Let's see if we can stick to it.
I have a question.
Are you guys ready to play? Yes, question, Dr. Schulman.
Something just hit me, and of course, I have that kind of mind that whatever we talked about before this doesn't make any sense to me. Are bioethics different in a pandemic than in just sort of every other time?
So one way to think about what I and my colleagues do around the world, this is not a local phenomenon. I am happy to mention that your University of Miami Ethics Institute is a WHO collaborating center in ethics, and we've been working with our colleagues around the world on most recently on artificial intelligence and guidelines for its appropriate use, and also have been doing stuff in public health. So think of ethics, or health ethics is the top branching node here, right at the top of my nose, I guess, right? Underneath that, think of 3 different sub-branches. One of them is going to be clinical ethics, the practical issues that nurses and physicians face in taking care of patients, either ambulatory in a clinic or in a hospital. Second, think of those legs in a stool, perhaps. Second one is going to be research ethics, how we use science to try and learn how diseases work, how to prevent them, what drugs work, and that sort of thing. If you care about animal research, that could be under that too.
But that's all bioethics, correct?
Yes, it is, which is why bioethics is much broader. Medical ethics is just that bit about medical practice. Bioethics is all professions and these other 3 legs of the stool. So clinical ethics, research ethics, and the third leg is public health ethics. Public health sciences include epidemiology, biostatistics, prevention science, and so forth. All right, and so to answer your question, Dr. Schulman, the answer is no. We want these to be how should we put this? Anastomosed. I remember what that means. And anastomosis in GI is when you link together 2 tubes in your gut, or it might be elsewhere than that. You do it with 2 veins or arteries. It's when you connect 2 things, and we want to link these things together with each other. In part because if you're a physician, you're seeing a patient, you're learning something that could be useful to other patients. If you're doing that informally or collecting data through a health department, that's contributing to public health. Perhaps you're doing research and you enroll your patient in a study to actually do it more formally. If you're in public health, you want to keep up on what all the others are doing. And if you're in research, it'd be irresponsible not to know what the standards are in clinical care and also what's happening in public health. So they are, think of them as like 3 electrons orbiting a nucleus of shared values.
Excellent.
Research, public health.
Cool.
So let's start with some of my observations as a Martian of what I've witnessed throughout the whole shebang. And then I want you both to comment on it. If you have any ideas or experiences on it, just jump in. We're going to hit them one at a time. The first one was the concept of individual versus civic responsibility. And I know we talked about this a little bit before the show, but this is a critical, when I went through all of the material of the show, I realized, you know what, there's a critical distinction when we're talking about bioethics of what is the ethics of the individual versus what's the ethics of the society, or like what's your responsibility to yourself or your own healthcare, your own autonomy, and when does, say, justice, where's that shift, that balance to civic responsibility? Perhaps I should frame it better.
No, but you've raised a very large question, Dr. Sylvester. That is to say,
what I do.
We enjoy and ought to enjoy the privileges of having of being self-acting autonomous beings with self-determination, right? You mentioned autonomy, or think of it as self-determination. This is a very old concept, and it underlies a lot of human rights. There's certain things you really ought not do to me because they're wrong. They may violate a right of some sort. They may infringe on some liberty, and that makes them wrong to do. On the other hand, the counter pressure to that is we are all, unless we're hermits on a hill, in a community where we have responsibilities to each other. Forgive me, I don't mean to be vulgar, but I don't get to pee in the pool, right? Because you're swimming in it too. That we have duties to each other, even though we've made no formal agreement. When I went to the swimming pool, there was no contract signed that people are going to behave well in the pool. It's what we do as members of civil society. And it would be kooky for me to say, well, you're infringing on my liberty interest in peeing in the pool. I don't have such an interest. I obviously need to do this every once in a while, but I have a responsibility to you and to both of you and to everybody in my community to not do that. Similarly, with lots of other things that bear on public health. For example, if you want to extend the life of a lot of people on Earth, what we've learned is this. Next time, Dr. Sylvester, I need a budget for special effects. So I'm going to be doing
Yes.
Yes. Here's a measure of life, and wellness and health on Earth at time 0. Now watch closely. Here it is after we add in organ transplantation, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, ventilator support, and gene therapy. Did you see that? That's an increase in the amount of life and wellness on Earth. Now, here it is after we ensure that everybody on Earth has clean water and clean sanitation. Right? Assuming that you all agree that your life is not worth more than anyone else, and it's not. I mean, it'd be hard for me to say that my life is worth more than yours, or yours is worth more than my friend in Paris, or hers is worth more than that guy in Botswana, or his is worth more than the guy in Borneo. Human life are all equal. Okay, so if that's the case, then we really have for this, we want to do better in terms of managing waste and providing good sewage and making sure that people have clean water to drink and nutrition and shelter. Those are the foundations.
Okay. So I want to spend about 2 minutes on each one of these because covering all of this, I think, is more important than going into depth. But let me toss out another one. The whole concept of triage, that was an observation that came up, like, oh, okay, now we've got hospitals like in New York or Seattle that are overloaded. How do we triage COVID patients differently? Or how do we triage the severity of the illness? Because triaging in and of itself is a very core bioethic principle, ones that dates back to the beginning of medicine itself. How do you see bioethics involvement in the triaging that had to have occurred, not just at the hospitals, but in society? Like, hey, maybe the recommendations were that the vulnerable get the vaccine first versus, young healthy people, although there have been some countries that target young healthy before the ill, which is interesting.
So this is the first time that we have done so much work so quickly around the world. I mean, we've managed to develop a vaccine and we went from 0 to 60 really quickly. The questions that you ask are about priority setting. How, given that antecedent background, ought we to devote the resources we have? The triage, every farmer knows triage, right? You have a crop that's failing, you're not going to use your water on it if it's going to be wasted in the water. Use it on the crop that will produce something that you can eat. And so humans have been making these decisions for a long time. What's the most efficient use of resources? In the context of COVID, we were worried about not having enough drugs, ventilators, vaccines to go around. And those were really difficult decisions. And in some sense, it was a study to try and find out. It was under uncertainty, right? But what a lot of people agreed is, for example, if in your clinical judgment, Dr. Sylvester, I'm going to die, no matter what you do, but Dr. Schulman would live if you devoted your time to him, what ought you to do? And I think most people have the straightforward intuition that well, you can spend all your time with me because you like me better, and my hair is not as grayer than his, right?
Not
Or
much.
in which case you'll have two dead people.
Mm-mm.
If on the other hand you say, Ken, you're just not going to make it, I'm going to save Richard, why in that case it would be irrational for you not to save one person. Do the math. You want two dead people, you want one dead person. Triage is based on trying to make decisions like that, which are easy to say, but in a battlefield or an ICU can be exquisitely difficult.
And we saw this in the pandemic, and it's an important observation that I just bring up because I want the viewers to think about that. The other observation I saw is that both sides, it did become polarized, a lot of these issues. Both sides in my indictment are guilty of absolutionism and extremism of their own agenda, to me.
Which sides?
Huh?
What sides?
The
We were agreeing about everything. There are no
Whether
sides.
it's the side of vaccines are good or bad, or anti-vaxxers, or masks, or anti-maskers, or my point is this issue brought out the polarization. And why did debate become non-existent? Is it because we're paralyzed by fear, Dr. Schulman? What happened? Because that's an observation that I find peculiar as a Martian visiting this planet.
Well, patients just, it was very interesting to me because I've been doing this gig, if you count school, for 40 years now. And I saw things in the last 12 months from a psych point of view that I've never seen. The level of suicidality, drug overdoses, I got a decade's worth in 12 months. It's funny because they weren't talking about COVID. It was almost like everything else was amplified.
Mm-hmm.
The fear levels, the way it's almost like it's in the air. People are breathing it. If you're talking about,
They quite literally are.
well, maybe, but the fear
Stress.
has been everywhere you turn. There's fear.
It's scary, right? And so what I think ordinary people would say, I intend to say nothing controversial. Ordinary people, when they're faced with that level of distress, behavioral health maladies and whatnot, say, what can we do to help our compatriots, right? If someone is suffering, I don't think it's controversial to say, what do you need? How can we help? Dr. Sylvester's question about polarization is because, well, our country's become polarized for a lot of reasons that we need sociologists and anthropologists. I said during the election, this is not about politics anymore. This is about anthropology.
This issue should not have been as polarizing. I don't think anyone expected the national. Richard and I, or Dr. Schulman and I, have talked on this show before. What if aliens invaded? People would unite against the aliens, and we had a new alien visit this planet. It was called COVID-19. So why was there such a bipartisan, almost, or even split difference, rather than this unified Independence Day, let's go kick the aliens' ass? Again, it's an observation. I don't see a lot of middle debate. People are very polarized, and perhaps it's because of their insecurity. Perhaps it's because of social media disseminating what they want to hear. It's just an observation that I find kind of fascinating.
I found the social media part of this to be very powerful. Forget about COVID for a minute. You have people who would say things to each other on social media that if you were in somebody's living room, you'd never say. Your Facebook stones, so to speak, where the other side is not somebody who disagrees with you, but somebody who's delusional or evil. And that was going on long before COVID.
And it was magnified.
And exacerbated, it was magnified here, that there was no room for debate. You were just a person who wanted to kill grandma, or you were just a fascist that wants to take away my rights.
Well, another thing that I saw magnified is along the same line is the difference in interpretation of the same set of facts. So you can have one side, if we're going to be polarized, seeing the same set of facts and drawing different conclusions, right?
So are you talking about facts? One of the challenges we face is it may be a social media phenomenon. When I get in my car and I turn the switch and it starts, I don't get to say to you, the carburetor genie just swung into action, right? When I go to my physician and she prescribes an antibiotic for a bacterial infection and I'm cured, I don't say the anti-bug gods cured me. When we, speaking of Mars, on your home planet, Dr. Sylvester, I hope you're okay because we keep dropping stuff there. And now we got a little helicopter. That's, by the way, the coolest science news of the year so far is a helicopter on Mars.
I know. I hardly slept because of the damn noise.
I call the Martian police and say, hey, put a lid on your helicopter, Earthlings.
Yeah, it was inconsiderate.
Was people who know how this stuff works were able to send a conveyance to another planet, land it safely, drive around, take pictures, send them back. The reason they did that is because they're not entitled to pick which facts they like. The reason that works is there's a scientific basis for that, as there is in cell biology, as there is in psychiatry, as there is in transportation, geology. Pick a science that some of the, say, bioethics began, remember, with these new technologies, with this new ventilator, or with this new way of putting oxygen in your blood. We can keep someone who's unconscious alive for a long time now. The question, I don't get to say my culture doesn't believe in hearts, or my culture doesn't like the fact that there's gravity on Mars. It's what's the appropriate use of the technology. The facts are there whether people agree to them or not. Remember, we're not. I'm not a relativist. I believe there are objective standards, moral standards, and scientific standards, and we just don't get to make those up. Unfortunately, with social media, people were given to believe that they could. And if social media, as you know, were exploited by foreign adversaries and businesses. I'm referring. The evidence is clear, and that other foreign governments tried to, and succeeded in altering the Brexit vote.
As a bioethicist, though, what do you think about the emotional based versus political based thinking as injecting itself into what fundamentally are bioethical conundrums? They're bioethical questions and issues.
It was hard enough to begin with. You're absolutely right. No, it makes me sad, frankly. It was hard enough to figure out whether we ought to alter this gene, whether we ought to start this new treatment that's unlikely to succeed, whether we ought to use this really intelligent computer to do a diagnosis or a prognosis. That was hard enough. Now what we're saying is now you need to mediate between groups of ideologues who want the facts to be theirs, want the interpretation to be theirs, independently of standards for making an interpretation, right? I don't get to pick my own logic, and I don't get to pick my own facts, right? That sometimes in argument, and that's what we do, and lawyers sometimes do this quite well, sometimes not so well. You give reasons for your belief, and the right answer is going to be the one that has the best reasons for it.
Yeah, but if you talk to a lawyer, they'll say if you have the law, argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you don't have the law or the facts, just argue.
Well put. Which is why sometimes the discussions in the law are not particularly helpful. But the point is, when a lawyer is arguing about rights and evidence, there are great debates in the law now about what counts as evidence. What kind of expertise do you need to judge something? The disputes that we have that end up in court may be about a patent on a drug. It may be about who, you know the old story, if a rooster lays an egg on the wall between two farms, who owns the egg? And my answer, of course, is that roosters don't lay eggs.
A good one.
I wasn't biting on that one.
Yeah, but I was thinking about what you said before. We got these great pictures of a helicopter on Mars, and I was blown away too, because I'm a space cadet also. And this morning, I couldn't get a clear connection with a patient across town. So the idea that, the technology is perfected is crazy.
That we can send a signal of a video from Mars, but the telehealth has got, sorry, you're on mute, but that's a matter of priority setting. Right? If we valued health more than we do, we'd have a better health system in our country.
Well, and now you bring up a good topic, distrust of government and of the medical establishment at large, I think is at an all-time high, certainly compared to the 1950s when you just did what your doctor told you. why, I mean, again, as a Martian, this is an observation that I think weighs into some of the bioethics and some of the struggles that bioethic principles have in solving these big questions. You have a large percentage of people out there that distrust the government, the corporations, the medical establishment. And, you know, how do you deal with that as a bioethicist when you're working against these prejudices, essentially?
There are prejudices. Well, one of the things that we talk about a lot when it comes, for example, to the use of computers is the question of trust. Do you trust me or not? And what we see is there's a lot of manufactured distrust, and it's being done. Look, the reason why our comrades in Russia would value chaos in the United States has to do with geopolitics. That if you listen to Putin lately, this is Mother Russia, Imperial Russia, raising its powerful bear claws to say, we are not going to accept your Western values. Same with China. China does not embrace values. It's in their interest to destabilize the United States of America and Western Europe. And if the way you do that is you get people distrusting doctors and distrusting the government, and distrusting transportation and distrusting science, then you win, right? But I say the distrust is very often manufactured, and when it comes to health and medicine and public health, it's got a body count associated with it. There are people who just don't trust, and sometimes that trust is, look, you have to earn trust, and so there are more entities we trust more than others. I trust my health department. I trust the Centers for Disease Control, or I did until it was politicized, right? These are people who are bound by following the evidence no matter where it leads and giving bad news. They've always been under some pressure to manage bad news. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not going to trust them, we're doomed, because there's nobody else who knows that much epidemiology, that much biostatistics, that much prevention science. Either you get to make it up as you go along, or you adequately support experts in public health who know what they're talking about.
I know what
It's also a matter of how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole.
I know what you're thinking.
You say that the Russians want to disrupt us and the Chinese, our own three-letter agencies, namely the CIA, you can go into all kinds of Project Mockingbird and all this stuff where they bought journalists. The idea that we haven't disrupted it is we disrupted it like crazy.
I wasn't suggesting that at all. The United States is not blameless.
And we're going to come to that later.
You're wrong when you do it, no matter who does it.
I totally agree with that. Okay.
I'm going to stick to 2 minutes on just observations, because all of this is when we really get into the nitty gritty and some of the general and specific considerations.
2 minutes with us, Mark? Are you really have drank the Kool-Aid?
No. So another observation is a lot, and everyone knows this one. People are dying without the comfort of their loved ones because of rules of the pandemic. People who live together often don't get infected together, which we'll say what implications that has on when we get to the next section here. There are some comparisons to thalidomide, and a lot of people would say, well, a lot of people don't know what thalidomide is, or they don't understand what it was. Basically, the FDA, the newly formed FDA, helped keep thalidomide out of the United States. And most of the thalidomide babies were because other governments did not have as rigorous at the time protocols for investigating the safety. But it's kind of got some comparisons here. And I think about it, we've also deviated from the established public health principles that we've relied on for so long, which again, we're going to give specific examples of that below. And then I think the last thing is censorship. This is a new thing where we're censoring people who have a difference of opinions. And that goes back to what we were originally saying about the polarization. In a land of free.
I'm missing you. Who's censoring whom?
Maybe alternative treatment options, other therapies. Facebook doesn't want any discussion on any deviation from the get the vaccine agenda. Dr. Merkela, I think, has been threatened. They shut down the president's Twitter account. It goes on and on about.
Well, because the president was lying to people. That was a good reason to shut it down. You're the publisher of the New York Times. You're not publishing my letter to the editor does not mean you're suppressing me. Editors make decisions. If you don't like that, then subscribe to a different newspaper. And we saw that. We have a bunch of alternative news sites where you can make up anything you wanted. That the people thought that it was like one of the broadcast networks. But even if you were on, if I call up the NBC or CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Times for that matter, or Fox News and say, I insist you broadcast me or publish my stuff, or I'm going to accuse you of censoring me, there's no journalism. And the fact of the matter is, editors need to make decisions, and every editor would say, if I say something that I, as an editor, think is wrong or false, then I don't have a duty to publish it. And if there's a public health consequence to me being wrong or false, then I probably have a public responsibility not to publish it.
But I hate to use the word cancel culture because I don't know that I fundamentally understand what that is and what that means. But you can't, I mean, both of you would agree that we've seen an increase in the attempts to suppress other people's viewpoints because we see them as irresponsible, uneducated, delusional, harmful.
Sylvester, I want to disagree with you. I have not seen any such increase because I haven't been measuring it and I can't track it. I know it's easy for me to say of other people when they disagree with me that I've been suppressed, but I don't know there's been an increase at all. Social media has changed everything we do. The idea, our personal relationship. I'm going to send you a smiley face and a kiss, and that's going to pass for what nowadays? The fact of the matter is, people are not reading. I mean, if you're old enough, you remember Walter Cronkite. Right? You remember Huntley Brinkley. You remember when we all had the same, wasn't necessarily good for democracy, but it was all sort of a core trusted paucity of news sources. And now different people in the history of journalism is different parties having their own papers. Most professional journalists said that's not very good because you can be partisan with your opinions, but not with your facts. And so a professional journalist is going to try and be nonpartisan. I haven't noticed anything that suggests the empirical claim is true that people are suppressing each other more than before. If anything, I think I see a whole lot of people saying a whole lot more than they ever did without being suppressed.
Well, what bothers me is more that the politicization of this stuff, where doctors who would prescribe medications off-label, there's some statistics that in psychiatry it's about 70% off-label, would get their licenses pulled for wanting to prescribe hydroxychloroquine off-label. And this was
into the next section. It's a perfect segue, Rich.
All right, okay.
I'm teeing you up here.
Well, okay, because to me, you know, the debate isn't always that the president is lying. The debate is there are doctors in Europe that had studies February of 2020 that they were publishing. Those things got suppressed in social media.
I don't know if they suppressing stuff because you disagree with it, if it's scientific, is a bad idea. On the other hand, as we know, the progress in science is very slow. It's painfully slow. It's accretive. We've developed a vaccine that actually seems to work pretty well. A bunch of vaccines, thank you very much. And around the world, people wanted to develop them. The French are disappointed theirs didn't work very well. There's a question about how well any of them works. But the plural of anecdote is not data. I think the fact of the matter is that hydrochloroquine, when people that we ought to trust have looked at it, said it doesn't work.
Well, yeah, well, the point is that if the research part of this, when did they administer it? How did they administer it? If you administered it when somebody was already on a ventilator, of course it's not going to work. The idea here is that it became a blanket thing where nobody got to talk about it, nobody got to discuss it. And there were a lot of licensed physicians who were saying our observations are different.
If you Google that and you look at pick your favorite news media you want to revile and Google that term, you'll see a lot of discussion. It was brought to attention. People never heard of it before until the president mentioned it. There was a lot of discussion about hydrochloroquine and other entities that people thought might be useful.
Once again, we're going to get to that in a minute. I want to switch gears and talk about general considerations because, and then, you know, if you guys, God love you, can limit your responses to a minute or two. We'll get through all of them. But like, for example, one general consideration for all this is what I call the Spock logic, right? That the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. There is a tenet, it applies here. When is the treatment worse than the illness? You know, and that goes back to the individual versus the society. What are your thoughts on that? How do you?
Well, look, so this is based on the idea that it's radio, and we have duties to our compatriots. That citizenship requires that. I think my example was I'm doing my interpretive dance, waving my arms around, and that's fine until my fist hits you in the nose, right? My desire to do my fabulous creative interpretive dance does not entail a liberty interest in hurting you. And what we try and do in public health, the reason quarantine, remember, comes from the ship that was kept for 40 days off the coast of Venice because the people of Venice didn't want plague in their city. The people on the ship didn't say, we have a liberty interest in making you sick. We isolated them by force in their ship offshore, right? That's because we don't want to hurt people. And the problem is, if I'm sitting where I'm sitting, I'm concerned about my family and me, you, yours, and you. The point of public health is there's no one's family predominates over others. We have to treat all individual families equally, and if we can save 1,000 lives, that's the needs of the many over the needs.
I guess what I meant by treatment, I should have clarified, is the lockdowns, the environmental impact, how it's affected mental health. What about domestic violence? You know, what are the other compensatorily shifting things that go on as a result of the way the public health approach has gone in this country?
So I appeal to my Martian overlords to say, here's the deal: go back in time. It's a year ago, and given your supernatural powers, you can predict the future. You can say, we're not going to have any lockdowns, any quarantines, any of that. Even with them, you can have 3 million dead people and how many hundreds of millions of people infected. Now, can you say those 3 million dead people, they should suck it up and their families should just soldier on? We didn't want to make anybody wear a mask or shut down a business because we were more concerned with other considerations. It's a tough call. The people who had the responsibility to make the decision said, we're going to err on the side of trying to keep the number of dead people to a minimum. There's going to be collateral damage. There always is. You talk about unintended consequences. We sometimes are learning them by virtue of the fact that we're going through it. And the next time we have one of these, and we will have future viruses and future bacteria because climate change is causing them, then we're going to have learned from this experience.
Well, Dr. Schulman, what would you say about border control and rejecting entry for folks that have positive tests when the tests themselves may not be 100% reliable?
I thought you only said 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, my dissertation was on test construction, and using the PCR test the way they did, to me, made no sense from the moment that I read about it. But the idea is that it became the politics of this was really incredible. You know, it's okay if you meet as long as you're protesting something, then social distancing doesn't matter. If you're coming across the border, you don't need to be tested. I think I'm with Mark in terms of the extremism on this has made us a little crazy, but there's also the moving goalposts that have made people not trust. I don't know if this falls under bioethics. I send that over to you, sir.
Yeah, we make decisions. Certainly you, or certainly Mark makes decisions, clinical decisions, without having perfect knowledge. It's really easy to criticize what people did with some hindsight. I'm sure a lot of people wish they could have do-overs on this, but we didn't know, and we were afraid of a lot of people catching a bad case of death. And in fact, 3 million around the world have.
So I hear you. But then it's like this law is eternal except for this Tuesday. I mean, the idea was that, okay, we're going down a certain road, but it's okay as long as you're protesting.
I'm missing your point about bioethics.
We're coming up on that argument here too. What about getting the vaccine after the infection? What are the bioethics implications of doing that?
Will that prevent the reoccurrence or the spread of the virus? It's an empirical question. That's outside my area of expertise.
Okay.
Right? I can't answer that. I think that,
I guess what I meant to say is if you could do, a titer on someone who's already had COVID, they still have antibodies. Should you then still force that person to get another vaccine or to get the first vaccine when, quite frankly, they may or may not have gotten over physically the original infection? We have long haulers. I have several patients who have been sick for months from COVID, and introducing the vaccine may or may not make them worse. That was kind of more along the lines of what I was thinking versus
who's forcing whom to do what now? The key point is that someone's being forced to do something.
Yeah, so if we're talking about vaccine passports, again, this is an ethical conversation for us Martians. I don't know if vaccine passports already exist. I don't know if they will ever exist. But just the concept of vaccine passports, should they apply to people who have already had COVID and have measurable antibodies?
Great question. I don't know if having those measurable antibodies is adequate to stop the spread of the virus. Maybe, maybe not. There are some people who, for ideological reasons, imagine it's a thought experiment. We have a rapid, free, accurate test. Would it be okay to ask someone to be tested before they walk into my restaurant or my football stadium? I think most people would say, yeah, we want to open up the economy as quickly as possible without making any more dead people. So someone might say, if it's free, if it's accurate, if it's rapid, that would be a good thing to do. Right?
I would add if it was reliable and valid, of course it would be a good thing to do.
Right.
As long as the test is reliable and valid.
Right.
Why wouldn't anybody want to do that? The question though is we don't have anything close to that.
One argument.
I don't know if anything close to it is true or not. We certainly don't have that. But if suppose, for example, the two of you were about to meet, the three of us are about to meet in a room, and I know that one of you has just tested negative and one of you has not gotten the test. Are you saying I should be utterly indifferent about that? My answer is no. Look, it's imperfect. It's probabilistic, like most science, where we don't have all the data. But rationality requires that you try and cut your losses. It's the opposite of that is buying a lottery ticket as an investment. I'm unlikely to win. But the odds are that if someone is not tested, not vaccinated, and has been moving about with other people, she's more likely to be a vector for the virus. I didn't make that up, and that's not about the evil governments or drug companies trying to beguile us.
I think what I'm reacting to is the idea, and this is not coming from you, but in general, that there's a black and white on this.
Right.
That this is 100%. That's the way that it's presented. That it's 100% because I don't think science works that way. That we're looking at probabilities and we're looking at many shades of gray.
Even if you made it about like talk to your doctor and that message was put out there, like this is a decision between you and your doctor. Well, did you know that maybe your kid's doctor, the pediatrician, gets kickbacks? I didn't believe this. I had to look this up because I don't get kickbacks for squat. But
you picked the wrong specialty. You could have got kickbacks.
Insurance companies reward pediatric practices who have 100% vaccination of their patients, and so that's
why would they do that? Do you think?
I don't know about the reasons why. I want to think about the bioethics of that, because they're
trying to pay out as little money as they would, and then they would need to otherwise for paying for the treatment of all the kids who got sick, but for the vaccine. Vaccines reduce disease. Vaccines. Look, when I was born, and
like you said,
I could have had polio.
What if you have a kid who has a reaction to a vaccine and died, and then you can say, "Oh, well, tell that to the kid's family who died." I think.
What do you say to me when the kid who didn't have the vaccine makes my daughter sick and die? Right. I mean, look, this is why public health is not supposed to be about individuals advancing their interests.
Yeah.
When the polio vaccine came out, a certain number of people would actually get polio from the vaccine. But overwhelmingly, it was like quite literally one in 1.5 million, right? And we decided as a country and as a planet that, have you ever seen, by the way, your viewers should look at pictures of iron lungs to see what we did to kids and look at the number of kids who died from polio. Is it permissible to take a chance on a kid you can't identify in advance that she might die and in the process save 50,000 lives? Most people would say, yeah, that math is pretty compelling. And therefore, I have a duty as a citizen to participate in that vaccine program, as opposed to I'm not going to run the risk that my kid's going to get it. So I'm going to make sure that the rest of you do so that she can benefit without me contributing to the Commonwealth. That makes me a bad citizen, not a good parent.
How about one can still get infected and transmit the virus after being vaccinated? What's the bioethical argument for or for even getting the vaccine at that point?
So we're learning about these vaccines. They're different vaccines. Some of them have different profiles. Some of them don't work as well as others. But you can't, it's not fair to the people who are trying to save lives to say, oh, we found a vaccine that doesn't work, therefore let's nobody get vaccinated. I know you're not saying that, but that's what someone might infer.
This is an extension of the last, which, getting the vaccine after the infection. This is an extension to that issue. If you're infected and you can still, okay, so the people who haven't been sick, the people who get the vaccines, which we're seeing a lot of people at the time of taping, we're seeing a lot of people are getting the vaccines right now. Many of them, some of them, a few of them, whoever, one of them, I don't really care. Some people will get COVID after getting the vaccine. They will get infected and they will transmit the virus. So at that, based on that bioethical argument, why vaccinate? Because
bioethical argument. That's an example of one counterexample, one adverse event. How many drugs do you prescribe where in testing someone had an adverse event? You can't say because somebody had an anaphylactic reaction or allergic reaction, therefore we're not going to give the drug to anybody. So that doesn't make scientific sense. Don't be looking for the weaknesses and try and find out how you can use a little bit of a weakness here to destroy the entire edifice. I think where you're coming from is a demand, and a wise demand, for more and better information, more and better science.
Or conscientious.
By saying we don't trust scientists and then take their tools away when we try and say we need to do a refined job of finding out what works.
How about the bioethics of people, and I should have put specific considerations before general, but vaccine viral shedding. There's a lot of people out there and some evidence that
it's imperfect. It's imperfect. But in population health, there's going to be some sloshiness. That's the way when we talk about thousands or millions or tens of millions or billions of people, you're not going to have unanimity in every response, every intervention, they've known for a long time that people who are vaccinated might still be vectors, which is why having been vaccinated, still wear a mask, because I think it's my duty as a good citizen to do so.
Yeah, clearly. And terrain theory versus germ theory. A lot of people don't know what terrain theory is. Briefly, terrain theory argues that if the body is well and balanced, then germs that are a natural part of life and coexist in our world and in our bodies and in the environment will be naturally dealt with by the body without causing sickness. There are a lot of people that believe in this.
How's that working out?
Like the flat earthers, they got a lot of space on the internets. But if that's something that they're using as a religious exemption or an objection because they just don't believe in the germ theory, do we have a bioethical right to force societal, the justice and societal measures on them?
Let's put it differently. Do they have any kind of right at all to make my kids sick? Once again, terrain theory sounds, I suppose at ground, maybe it means something like, if you take care of yourself and you're well, you're going to be more able to resist infection. But everybody gets infections, and some of them are really serious. And when you get them, the proper thing to do is not ignore them. The proper thing to do is treat them, otherwise people die. And we don't want that to happen. The question is, to begin with the ethical foundations, is what are my duties to my community? And what you seem to be saying is they have articulated a right to pee in the pool that we're all swimming in. And I don't buy that. I think that's unfair, makes you a bad citizen, it makes you selfish. And there's no virtue in selfishness, goodness knows.
Yeah, but virtue has got little to do with bioethics, does it?
Well, it depends on your approach. I was using the term in a very broad way. In terms of bioethics, what a lot of people would argue is you need to require, for example, in Florida, we don't require helmet laws, right? But are any, how about worker safety rules? Are they okay? How about child labor laws? We're having a reassessment of the very role of government in society, which I think is a really good thing. How much government is too much government? How much control is too much? This is a fabulous, beautiful American argument, and we need to continue to have it every generation. On the other hand, the idea that you don't want that big nanny state saving too many babies is one that a lot of people look at and say, come on, that's ideology. That's not ethics.
I like what your comments yesterday about reason and responsibility.
Well, right. So what my duties, I can't say to you, I have a duty to go water the tree while there's someone drowning, right? That we identify what's right and what's wrong based on best reasons. And those reasons include some of the principles you mentioned: respect for life, the obligation to reduce suffering, that sort of thing, and disease. And so responsibilities, to say I have a responsibility to do something, for you to utter that I have a responsibility means you got to give me the reasons for it. And I think that you can do that. You can't give me a duty that I'm unable to do. You can't say, we want you to go jump in the deep end of the pool and save the baby if you can't swim, right? On the other hand, if it's shallow enough, most people say, yeah, there's a classic example in ethics. I'll ruin my fabulous shoes if I save the baby in the puddle. The answer is we value lives more than shoes. And therefore you ought to do that. I don't say to you, I've got a liberty interest in watching and not getting my shoes wet if someone else is drowning.
So
responsibility is based on reasons.
Dr. Schulman, what do you think is the long-term impact on the children?
2 minutes. Children live in fear right now, constant fear. There's going to be a great need for what you and I do in terms of unpacking this and helping people to live without the fear. There's so much to talk about with this. We could go on for hours and hours, you know. I actually want to ask one more question, not about the kids' fear, because I'm dealing with everybody's fear kind of on an hour-by-hour basis. What about the role of profit in bioethics, that corporations can make huge profits on this, on a pandemic or just about anything?
Great question. I should confess to you that I went into ethics in hopes of acquiring vast personal wealth.
I know you did. I can tell by your shirt.
Yeah, I was misadvised. Great question, and it's one where I want to say that our duties to our compatriots sometimes exceed any perceived right to acquire vast personal wealth from the misfortunes of others. I think we've all benefited from a lot of products in industry. We tend to support them. My institution and others supports what we call technology transfer. Sometimes tax money supports research that ends up producing a patent. We try and manage that because we want the benefits of the science. But when profit becomes all powerful, when profit guides the research mission, when profit corrupts our motives, when profit produces conflicts of interest, then it is undermining science and undermining society just as surely as extremist ideologies are.
What about permitting assemblies in these selective situations? Dr. Schulman, you touched on that before about, you know, it's okay to have a funeral for this person, but not that person, or protesting against, you know, lockdowns and masks and vaccines, or even the political assembly of these rallies. You know, what are the bioethics? How come bioethics sort of gets really thin in those situations, or we tolerate it over here? But, you know, if a mask slips down over the nose of a little old lady in New York, she is berated, shot, and quartered in the parking lot. But we can have sporting.
If I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Don't
Don't what?
Don't exaggerate.
Oh, okay.
No, that's funny. If I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
No, it's a million times we get through.
I didn't exaggerate enough.
I told you once, I told you twice.
Bioethics is a tool of critical analysis to guide clinicians, scientists, and policymakers to try and do the right thing when sometimes values are in conflict.
I would be terrified if the world
Action may or
without
may
it.
not be blameworthy or praiseworthy, and I need to know more about it to give you a proper consult. Berating people is generally not going to be effective. So I don't think berating people is generally a good idea. I think education is good. But against a background where people are using social media to look you in the eye and lie to you, that makes it all the more tricky.
What about the concept of psychoneuroimmunology of lockdowns, that the lockdown itself can cause stressful life events, situations, which, you know, reduce exercise, weakens our immune system, and paradoxically makes us more likely to contract that? Is that a bioethical concern, or is it way
It's a
down the line?
scientific question that raises ethical issues. Absolutely. We need to know what the consequences of all these things are. If, in fact, that lockdown and isolation kills more than 3 million people, then we've made a terrible mistake. I don't think it does. It makes life really yucky. We're all feeling the effects of it. No one is happy about isolation. No one is happy about it. No one said, oh boy, I can't, well, some people probably did. I can't wait to not go to work, not see my friends, not socialize. No one wants that. On the other hand, you know, it's the people who think about this the most and track diseases and their spread say this is a necessary evil, like a vaccine.
You know, I never really had this discussion. I really appreciate that you're with us today. What occurred to me, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, is bioethics really about asking the right questions?
Very often it is. It's what's the
that's what I'm hearing again and again. Are we asking the right questions?
right? But once again, in different in the clinical context, in the research context, in the public health context, we need to know what the facts are. We need to know what the values are. We need to know what all our options are, and then we try and make a decision or a recommendation. It's no guarantee for infallibility, and goodness knows we've made mistakes. The FDA got it right in thalidomide. It's gotten it wrong on other drugs. It's imperfect because the science is really complicated. There are a lot of people, and there's a lot of variation. And now we're discovering with the human genome, there's a lot of genetic subgroup variation.
And relatively little time to learn all of this.
And the environment affects it, behavior affects it. And so it's really, really complicated. But no one's claiming to be infallible. We're saying, let's try and do the best we can with the cards we're dealt. And it's nice to have the support of the people you're trying to protect when you're doing that.
Well, I would say that what you just said is not what's put out to the public.
By whom?
By whoever has the biggest mouthpiece. It's put out, this is what you got to do. And it comes out very black and white. And maybe I'm from the one who's really from Mars. I would have been much more comforted, and I know that I am definitely from Mars, if someone said, we don't really know that much about this, hang tight while we figure it out. That would have been very, very comforting to me, as opposed to, you need to do this, and because, you know, we got this covered.
But you're a unique individual, and you, I think, are qualified to have that pause. If you're a government or you're a large institution or World Health Organization, you want to put out a blanket statement, kind of a clear guidelines, because people, you know, when you're appealing to the masses, people want something consistent or reliable to hang on to. And a large percentage of them have faith in these organizations. We talk about the ones that don't, but they have faith and they're scared and they're going to look to someone who knows more than they do. Some don't, obviously, but you, as a critical thinker, are able to handle more, like a judge could handle more, you know, conflicting inputs before making a decision.
You're not channeling my mother now, are you?
You do.
Dr. Schulman, you raised a great point, and that is, at what point does someone who's responsible have the duty to sound the alarm? If you do it too early, people don't trust you the next time. If you do it too late,
that's exactly where I was going.
You know, my favorite example for that, Floridians, is hurricane forecasting. If you're the National Hurricane Center and you issue a call to evacuate a certain area and the hurricane goes elsewhere, people say, they don't know what they're talking about. If they waited to the last minute and the hurricane followed the trail and a bunch of people died on a road in the Keys, we'd say, why did you tell us sooner? Getting
You know,
this Goldilocks right is empirically really challenging. But if you're
but here's the thing: when Irma was floating around, and we were all worried about it, I have a friend who's a very well-known weatherman, and I called him up and I said, "What the hell's the matter with you guys?" What he said to me was very interesting. He said, "Well, we've never seen a storm this big, and our models are not working." I said, "I wish you would have told me that." To me, that would have been comforting to say, "Hey, we're doing the best we can. Guys, sit tight, take all the precautions. We're going to try to figure this out." Because when the prediction was wrong, people lost faith.
right, but we have no idea what to do is also not going to build confidence. It's hard to do, which is why transparency and truth always matter. And intentionally trying to deceive people is almost always going to be wrong. What is much time, Dr. Sylvester? Do we need not to?
What a great spot to wrap this up.
Yeah, we're gonna have to bookmark, and I don't know what.
Oh my God, it was really fun to talk to you.
To come back, can we do a part 2? I didn't even get to very specific considerations. We could pick up right where we left. Oh, your beards are lovely. I'm so happy. Yeah, because
your viewers didn't like it at all. Do some data collection, will you?
We'll do some data collection. Leave some comments below. We're honored and thrilled to have the good doctors Goodman and Schulman and Sylvester here to tackle the big questions. This is, I think, how society needs to think at large and understand why this is confusing and how to resolve it. So I hope you, is your schedule open next week? I hope we could figure out some way to come talk about some of the specific consideration, like pregnant women and vaccines and PTSD and masks and government telling doctors not to prescribe certain, and the religious objections. I mean, helmet and seatbelt laws, we just scratched the surface. There's so much good stuff here that I really think is important for people to listen to, think about. And
an entire master's degree in this. The fact of the matter is, what you've covered, as I think I may have suggested, it's not an hour-long program. It's an entire, look, people get PhDs now in bioethics, and the curriculum is exactly what we've been talking about.
And I think a bioethicist, quite frankly, should have sat on the president's commission to help direct these types of questions. Because if you don't have a bioethicist in the room.
No, right now, bioethics, the current administration agrees with you. Anyway, it was a privilege. Thank you very much for including me.
Thank you for
being here.
And for all of our viewers watching. And remember, until next week, where we pick up part 2.
Be well. We didn't get it right again.
We didn't?
No, we tried.
I feel like
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Live long and prosper.